Force's earliest activities abroad began in 1948. But it was in the decade that followed that the aircraft of the Blue Force became regularly engaged outside national borders. The mission that has remained more than any other in the collective memory took place between 1960 and 1962, when the men of the 46th Air Brigade of Pisa were involved in Operation Congo in Africa aboard C-119 aircraft. It was during the course of this first humanitarian mission that the Air Force paid most dearly in the history of its missions abroad. 2 flight crews were brutally massacred in Kindu on the 11th of November 1961 at the end of one of its many flights aboard the legendary Flying Wagons from Pisa. The tragic episode, which cost the lives of 13 Air Force members, points up the dangers inherent in every humanitarian mission conducted by the Air Force abroad. The 1990s began with the humanitarian emergency that followed the invasion of Kuwait by Iraqi troops. Italy's contribution to international diplomatic efforts resulted in sending men and equipment to the Persian Gulf, including the Tornado planes of the 6th, 36th and 50th Regiments, and the deployment of a vast range of C-130, G-222, DC-9 and Falcon 50 support planes to move men and materials. The planes with the tricolor cockades were marshaled in the Locust village, set up by Italian personnel in Al-Dhafra, in the desert of the United Arab Emirates. For the first time since World War II, Italian fighter bombers took part in a wartime operation, Desert Storm, which in 43 days definitively liberated Kuwait. During the first mission, a Tornado, the only one of a formation of 8 planes that could be refueled by a flying tank, was shot down by enemy planes immediately after attacking its target. Major Gianmarco Bellini and Captain Maurizio Cocciolone were safe thanks to their ejector seats, but were captured by Saddam Hussein's troops and held prisoner for 47 days. During the Gulf crisis, 6 RF-104s of the 3rd Regiment of Villafranca were also deployed, assigned by the NATO Mobile Reaction Force. The planes, in a tactical reconnaissance configuration, were marshaled at Iraq, Turkey, on the 6th of January 1991, as Italy's contribution to the multinational force sent by the Atlantic Alliance to protect the southern border of Turkey. On the 28th of February 1991, operations ceased, following Iraq's acceptance of all United Nations resolutions. The return to Italy of Major Bellini and Captain Cocciolone, followed immediately by the other pilots and specialists, marked the end of an unforgettable experience that contributed to re-establishing the sovereignty and independence of Kuwait. December 1992 marked the beginning of Restore Hope, a humanitarian operation that involved C-130, G-222 and HH-3F planes in Mogadishu, Somalia. The 18 months of operations in Africa were a severe trial for the more than 700 men sent during the course of the mission, whose objective was to end famine and improve health conditions in a country oppressed by a brutal civil war. The helicopters of the 15th Regiment and the planes of the 46th Air Brigade sent to Somalia were forced to work in the desert in a harsh climate far from the base on extremely risky missions of medical evacuation and health aid to the civil population victimized by the conflict among local warring factions. The operation scenario, restricted by a time frame that did not allow for proper camouflage, meant that the HH-3Fs had to fly in pairs, armed with rotating machine guns, and the pilots of the 15th Regiment had to fly dangerously low. The size and scope of the mission abroad, conducted alongside the other armed forces and lasting a year and a half without injuries or damage to equipment, made the experience a real milestone in the Air Force's history, especially in Somalia, a country where social and political balance, unfortunately, remains very fragile. Following the mission in Somalia, the Air Force was once again an important presence in Africa, this time in Mozambique. In what came to be known as Operation Albatross, C-130 and G-222 planes from the 46th Air Brigade in Pisa transported to the Army the soldiers and materials required to set up several base camps in a country ripped apart by a bloody civil war. Beginning in 1991, a particularly dangerous area opened up for missions abroad, the Balkans. An example was the shooting down of a G-222 involved in one of the many humanitarian flights to Sarajevo, an incident that caused the deaths of 4 members of the flight crew. In 1997, the Air Force took part in Operation Alba, the first multinational effort under Italian command. Albania is a country quite near Italy, involved in a crisis of enormous proportions. The growth of revolutionary groups, spreading crime and rampant violence in a country well supplied with weapons, led the international community to mobilize, intervening to turn back the wave of violence before it spread throughout the Balkans. The Blue Force, with a large airlift, helped to sustain the Albanian population and the multinational protection forces set up under the aegis of the United Nations. Humanitarian support actions were not limited to transferring the wounded, provisions and soldiers in the area of operations. Italy's soldiers also had the task of ensuring the constant flow of aid and creating a framework of safety in which the various international organizations could operate. All had to be completed in short time and without bloodshed, a seemingly impossible task that nonetheless was carried to completion with success. Worthy of note was the Air Force Field Corps of Engineers, which renovated the airport at Tiranas Rinas and made it usable for the first time in 50 years, equipping it for night use and adding modern meteorological structures. In the summer of 1999, the Mobile Support Division provided logistical support to the Field Corps of Engineers in Jakovica to build a landing strip and other airport structures. 52 days, in a climate that was certainly less than peaceful, the men of the Air Force managed to build a new airport from scratch. Supplied with modern equipment and run by Italian personnel, the airport provides a landing strip for air ambulances and medium-sized transport planes, as well as an advanced operations base for the NH-500E helicopters of the 72nd Regiment that took part in the K4 mission to support the Italian contingent. A mission on the threshold of the new millennium involved the transport planes of the 46th Air Brigade at Pisa, flying 16,500 kilometers from Italy to Darwin, Australia. Operation Stabilize, a multinational affair conducted in a tropical climate 8 time zones away from home, was the farthest mission away from Italy in the history of the Air Force. For 6 months, Italian soldiers were engaged on the island of East Timor, landing on short strips at makeshift airports deep in the jungle to transport men and equipment of the International Peace Force. This involved over 750 flight hours, more than 4,300 passengers, and 295 tons of materials. The numbers show how important Italy's participation was to Operation Stabilize, a mission that brought peace to the Indonesian archipelago, where before there had been nothing but violence. Beginning on the 16th of December 2000, the Air Force was once again involved in the Horn of Africa on a United Nations mission. The Italians' task was to make sure agreements were respected regarding the end of hostilities between Eritrea and Ethiopia, a war that had caused 70,000 deaths and the flight of over 1 million refugees. Italy's planes, this time painted United Nations white, carried out missions of transport, reconnaissance, and medical evacuation. One particularly important activity was the air photography of the P-166 planes of the 71st Group. With their on-board photographic equipment, they were able to map in detail the border area being fought over by the two nations. More than 3,500 flight hours were logged in just over 2 years, with high-risk tactical missions flown by G-222s, P-166, DL-3s, and NH-500s. Beyond this, the Air Force, with cooperation from the Red Cross, the Carabinieri, State Police, and the Navy, provided health aid to the local population, and even set up an airlift with Italy to transport children with diseases that could not be treated locally. In addition, the Blue Force personnel carried out other humanitarian activities of various kinds for the local population, including collecting medicines and funds for public utility facilities. On the 11th of September 2001, the concept of humanitarian Air Force missions abroad changed, and they became a real contribution to the global war on terrorism. This effort was marked in Afghanistan from the 10th of May to the 18th of October 2002 by the participation of the men of the Air Force Field Corps of Engineers in helping to restore security conditions in a country torn by war and the atrocities of the Taliban regime. The important task of the Air Force was to guarantee complete operability of the airstrip at Bagram in northeastern Afghanistan, which had been severely damaged by events before and after September 11th. American commanders gave the technicians of the Air Force Field Corps of Engineers an extremely delicate task, recognizing Italy's superior technology and methods even over corresponding divisions of the U.S. Army and Air Force. Once again, it would not have been possible to transport the necessary personnel and materials to the Italian troops stationed in Afghanistan without the help of the transport planes from Pisa, which were involved daily in missions from the airport in Manas, Kyrgyzstan, to Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. Shown during the Interforce Operation Ancient Babylon are two HH-3F helicopters of the 15th Regiment of Pratica di Mare, beginning in June 2003. They operated within the 6th Independent Operations Division from the Iraqi base in Khalil. The Air Force job was to support the Italian contingent, ensuring smooth operations of missions of medical evacuation, search and aid, reconnaissance, patrol, and convoy and support escort for ground troops. All this played out in an extremely hostile scenario and under constant risk from ground-to-air missiles still in the hands of the terrorists. Weather and environmental conditions were of the worst, with temperatures as high as 70 degrees Celsius. This situation presented a difficult challenge for the training and capacities of the Villafranca Mobile Support Division, which set up camp from scratch, fitting up tents, meeting areas, a nurses' station and a canteen. Also part of the mission was the division's health service, made up of officer physicians and non-commissioned health assistance officers who provided health care to soldiers in the Italian contingent and, in special cases, to Iraqi civilians. Despite the unfortunate episodes in Kindu and Nasiriyah, the Italian Air Force's missions abroad have been going on for over half a century. In the coming years, in Iraq, as in all other countries of the world, the men of the Air Force will continue to go wherever they are sent by the international community to bring Italy's contribution to peace and solidarity among peoples.